I have seen one or two things in my life, but never anything like this.
Eyes Wide Shut, directed by Stanley Kubrick, and The Wizard of Oz, directed by Victor Fleming, are two films that represent the peak of their respective time periods, especially in the way that they subtly convey deeper meanings through non-verbal subtext, which lies strictly within the frame, in the form of color. Despite both films being alike in that regard, they have a few key differences. One being the fact that The Wizard of Oz is a revered classic, and the other almost a black sheep by the work of one of the greatest directors to ever hold a movie camera. That isn't to say that Eyes Wide Shut didn't have its supporters.
A film about love, sex, and trust in a marriage, about learning to take things day by day and either accepting or ignoring whatever unpleasant truths come along. It's also a film I cherish because it puts you in the authoritative hands of an old master with a style that flies in the face of every modern convention.
But in no way was it as viewed as an equal to his other cinematic works. A large selling point of The Wizard of Oz was its breakthrough use of color. However, most people who saw it were entirely unaware that such a feat was even possible. It's very clear in this scene alone the colors being used to tell a story, that being the drastic shift in perspective from the sepia-hued real world and the Technicolor land of Oz. Even without the context, one can tell the fantastical dreamlike nature Oz holds, and all of that is accomplished via color. On the other hand, Eyes Wide Shut reimagines color to have a slightly different purpose, which is to convey the film's themes of dreams and the desire for sexual intercourse. Kubrick does this by associating a specific color to each theme, and then incorporating the mise-en-scène to facilitate this approach. For example, the color blue is meant to signify dreams, hence why Nicole Kidman's character Alice only steps into the blue light in this scene when she recounts her sexual fantasy with the naval officer. Consequently, when shown in Bill Hartford, Tom Cruise's character's head, the scene as he imagines it is entirely shot in a blue, dreamy filter. Red, on the other hand, is intended to illustrate sexual desire, which is why their bed sheets, where they were previously shown having relations, are entirely covered by a deep crimson. This color is then attached to the main antagonist of the film, who can be seen only wearing a red cloak, which is his character's actual name per the script. Not to mention, this red cloak is seemingly the mastermind behind the large-scale orgy, a fitting example of mass sexual desire, hence the abundance and apparent worship of the color red. Now, there is the argument to be made that these examples of red and blue could be attributed to coincidence on the part of the director, except when that director is Stanley Kubrick, who went on record stating his films have various hidden themes, the line between coincidence and intention begins to blur. In fact, this film holds the record for the longest ever continuous shoot of a motion picture.
But it just took so long for it to happen. It's shot for a year and a half.
That's incredible.
I know. Can you imagine? And I came onto it like a year in, and I auditioned like 6-7 times for one scene.
If the primary colors of red and blue represent sex and dreams respectively, both of which being the primary functions of a bedroom, then purple should be the combination of the two. Consequently, the prostitute Domino, who acts as both a literal and figurative dream girl, quote-unquote, for our protagonist, is adorned in all purple. Her dress is even hanging on by what seems to be a thread, hinting at how close Bill is to the sexual encounter he desires.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
In The Wizard of Oz, however, color serves a slightly different purpose, with its use of color in no way demonstrating any sort of sexual inclination. Frankly put, Oz has a certain Technicolor shine to it, with the famous yellow brick road being so bright it invites adventure. However, color in this film can be more generalized in its approach, with simply the presence of it making the distinction between the imaginary land of Oz and the real world of Kansas. This means that any scene with color is meant to be a dream. Perhaps the sheer overgeneralization of color is meant to mark the change between the more serious films of the silent era and the more lighthearted films Fleming would hope would supersede them in the future, thereby making the claim that this Technicolor technology would open the door for more imaginative and dreamlike storytelling, as if the entire film industry were finally arriving in the land of Oz. Both films incorporate within their plots the idea of color theory. That's the trouble. Which insists that even the addition of a single hue can change the way a viewer perceives a film. This idea is incredibly similar to screen theory, which implies that the actual images within film are essentially vehicles to transfer meaning upon their audience. Thus, every time a color is positioned in the frame, like the yellow brick road in The Wizard of Oz, it conveys symbolic meaning. Far and away, the most simplistic example of this found within The Wizard of Oz is the association with green and bad and pink with good. which is also respective colors of the two witches. Going along with screen theory, this means any time those colors are on the screen, it creates an atmosphere that either subconsciously or consciously reminds us of that fact. This is why Glinda's costume and Bubble are pink, reminding us of her goodness. And anything revolving around the idea of adventure is covered in yellow or red, which are in fact the two choices of roads Dorothy can take, which, because the film is a dream, would have taken her to the same inevitable destination. Red is also tied greatly to the Wizard of Oz by the shoes Dorothy wears, which the director chose to make that color as opposed to the original book-accurate silver, as the red falls in line with the idea that red and yellow are that film's adventure colors. When this theory is put through the lens of Eyes Wide Shut, the contrasting elements of the film begin to present themselves. As it is true both films incorporate color to arrive at thematic meanings, it is only in Eyes Wide Shut that the opportunity to incorporate newer technologies to achieve those effects is present. Obviously, The Wizard of Oz was incredibly cutting edge for its time. It was one of the first films to pioneer Technicolor, but the 60-year gap between the two films meant Eyes Wide Shut was always going to come out technologically ahead. For example, in The Wizard of Oz, multicolored LEDs simply didn't exist, meaning the use of color in shots like this were impossible. This shot incorporates high-strength LEDs and a specialty camera lens specifically chosen by Kubrick, which illustrates the conflicted nature of Bill's views on sex in this scene. Notice how he stands directly between the two colors, never really venturing into one or the other. Another result of new technologies is the precise placement of lens flares, which, going along with screen theory, have potential meanings. Lens flares were not impossible in 1939 when The Wizard of Oz was made, but they were not so easily achieved on purpose, especially when one considers the specific type of lens flare in this scene. This flare, in the lower end of the screen, is almost identical to a rainbow, a symbol used numerous times throughout the film, hence suggesting this scene is where the rainbow ends, as it marks the beginning of when the negative consequences of Bill's prior actions begin to take hold. Obviously, a flare like this cannot be on accident, as Kubrick would have done hundreds of takes, and if he didn't want it, the flare wouldn't be there. Also notice how in a real rainbow, blue is always the final color and red the first. Perhaps by making red and blue such prominent colors in the film, Kubrick is stating that, when viewed from the bottom up, a rainbow begins with a dream and ends with sex, much like how the film begins with a dream from Alice shaded in blue, and ends with both Bill and Alice in a red toy store acknowledging their mutual desire for a sexual encounter with each other. In the case of The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's dress, one of her few fragments of home, is bright baby blue, that isn't anywhere in the land of Oz, which insists the idea that blue in this film represents home, and the red shoes represent Oz, again showing a rainbow split with the colors on the top and bottom meaning opposite things. Nevertheless, due to the specific technology Kubrick was working with in Eyes Wide Shut, Wizard of Oz is unable to truly compete in that sole regard, making time a primary factor in the method of which a film can properly portray a dreamscape. Oz, by result, gives a much more linear dreamscape, with the more nightmarish aspects being shrouded in green or fire, like the Wicked Witch of the West, who quite literally is green and covered in fire. Despite green representing the general bad or nightmare Oz can create, it is only in the Emerald City that green's true meaning is revealed, which of course is fear. Every aspect of the film that makes Dorothy afraid is shrouded with that color. The tree that attacks her has green leaves. The cowardly lion emerges from a once green forest. On the topic of the fabled Emerald City showered in rainbow light, it does bear a striking resemblance to Kubrick's Rainbow Code in New York, for they both represent nearly identical ideas being portrayed by screen theory, that being what lies at the end of the rainbow. For Oz, the end is home, finally ending the fantastical dream. For Eyes Wide Shut, the end of the rainbow is sex, which of course was Bill's main goal in his dreamlike Midnight Odyssey, meaning the only way to end Bill's dream or to get to the other end of the rainbow was sex.